Welcome to the podcast, to preserve, protect, and defend the soul of America. I am Alex, and I will be guiding our conversation today.
And I'm Sam.
The topic we shall discuss in today's show: the Great Stadium Grift, American sports subsidies, owner leverage, and the fleecing of cities.
It is a heavy one, but man, is it fascinating.
It really is. So I want you to just picture Las Vegas, right? Specifically in the spring of 2016.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah. So at this exact moment in time, the city of Las Vegas possesses absolutely no NFL franchise.
Right.
Zero. None. There is no historic tradition of professional football in that specific market whatsoever. Yet the political apparatus of Nevada is presented with what I can honestly only describe as a staggering proposition.
Oh, wait, the Raiders?
Exactly. The Oakland Raiders franchise decides they want to relocate. And so, operating behind closed doors and driven by this completely artificial deadline that was manufactured entirely by the National Football League, the Nevada governor's office, and the state legislature, they agree to write a public check.
A massive check.
A check for $750 million.
Which is just wild to think about. I mean, drawn directly from public coffers, right?
Yeah.
Primarily financed through hotel room taxes.
Gross taxes.
Taxes that, could have easily been allocated in a dozen different directions for the public good.
Absolutely. $750 million allocated straight toward a $1.9 billion stadium project. But here's the actual mechanism that we really need to unpack for you listening today.
Right. Let us get into the math.
Because this massive infrastructure project would be owned and operated primarily for the private benefit of Raiders owner Mark Davis.
And we have to look at his net worth at that time.
Yes, so at the time of this negotiation, Davis's personal net worth was estimated at roughly $500 million.
Wait, so the public subsidy itself was literally worth more than the owner who was receiving it?
Exactly. It is this complete mathematical absurdity. The public entity assumes nearly 40% of the entire construction burden. And in exchange for taking on that immense financial risk, what do you think the public receives?
Let me guess. Nothing.
Zero. They get zero equity stake in the franchise. They receive zero share of the revenue from naming rights, zero from the luxury suite leases, zero from the daily concessions or parking or honestly any non-NFL events held in that building throughout the entire year.
That is just incredible. It means the taxpayer effectively acts as an angel investor, right?
Right.
Like an investor who funds the startup and takes all the downside risk, but then contractually agrees to just never take a single cent of the profits ever.
Right. You just get the privilege of paying full price for a ticket to sit inside the building you basically just bought for a billionaire.
It is unbelievable.
So the entire mission of our deep dive today, looking at this source material, is to answer a really fundamental question. How on earth did this become standard operating procedure?
Yeah, how did we get here?
Because we live in a society that has completely normalized this practice of taxpayers building absolute palaces for private billionaires.
And, to understand the architecture of this normalization, we really have to look backward. Because the modern model that you just described with Vegas is actually a radical departure from historical precedent.
Right. It was not always like this.
Not at all. If we go back to the early 20th century, the era we might call the golden age of private ballparks, the financial dynamic was just entirely different.
We're talking about the true cultural cathedrals of baseball here. Places that are etched into the American civic consciousness.
Exactly. Take Fenway Park, for example, which opened its doors in 1912. The Red Sox ownership group built that facility entirely at their own expense.
Using totally private capital?
Yep, private capital. And Wrigley Field, which originally opened as Weigman Park back in 1914, was financed without a single dime of public money.
Because the owners view themselves as operating local entertainment businesses, right?
Right. They understood that acquiring a facility to house their business was their own responsibility. Just like a department store owner building a storefront. You do not ask the mayor to buy your cash registers.
I was reading through the text about Ebbets Field in Brooklyn, completed in 1913, and the lengths the owner went to are just incredible.
Oh, the Charles Ebbets story is wild.
It really is. He did not go to the borough president asking for a handout. He spent years privately and quietly buying up dozens of individual disjointed parcels of land in the Pigtown section of Brooklyn.
Using fake names, right?
Yeah, he was reportedly using assumed names and these dummy corporations to make the purchases just so that local real estate speculators would not catch wind of his master plan and artificially drive up the land prices?
So he was operating almost like a covert agent just to secure the physical footprint for his own business.
Exactly. And he did that because it was universally understood by everyone that this was a private enterprise.
And that held true everywhere. Whether you look at Tiger Stadium in Detroit, or the original Yankee Stadium in the Bronx, or Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, the foundational rule held true across the board.
These storied temples were constructed by private interests for private profit.
Right. The cultural norm of that era was so firmly entrenched that the idea of a municipality writing a check to construct a baseball stadium barely even registered as a coherent thought.
Okay, so that sets a very clear baseline for us. Private businesses build private facilities.
Yeah.
But obviously something changed, so where does the tectonic plate shift? I am looking at the historical timeline in the text, and everything seems to pivot around 1952.
Yeah, 1952 is really the crack in the foundation, and you have to contextualize what is happening in America at this specific moment in time.
Post-war boom, right?
Exactly. The post-war boom is fundamentally altering human geography. You have the proliferation of television, which is changing how people consume entertainment at home. The middle class is fleeing the urban core for the suburbs.
And commercial aviation is taking off.
Right. The advent of reliable commercial aviation suddenly makes it logistically possible to move a sports franchise across the entire continent. You are no longer bound by train schedules.
And into that incredibly volatile mix walks Lou Perini, the owner of the Boston Braves.
And Perini is struggling. I mean, the Braves are hemorrhaging money, and they're failing to draw crowds, largely because they're just entirely overshadowed in their own market by the Boston Red Sox.
So he is looking for a way out.
Yes. And meanwhile, out in the Midwest, Milwaukee County decides to try a completely unprecedented municipal experiment.
This is the turning point.
It really is. They decide to speculatively build a stadium, Milwaukee County Stadium, with public funds. And it is specifically functioning as a lure to poach a major league franchise.
So it is essentially municipal bait. They literally build a trap and just wait to see what they catch.
And they catch the Braves.
Wow.
The team moves to Milwaukee in 1953, and the immediate results seem to just completely vindicate the entire strategy for the city.
Because it worked.
It worked brilliantly on paper. The city built the facility, the team played in it while paying a modest rent, and the crowds were massive. I mean, the team drew over 2 million fans a year and started competing for pennants right away.
So on paper, to the local politicians, it looked like a brilliant piece of civic investment.
Right. But the source material heavily emphasizes that this specific transaction unleashed a psychological virus into the ecosystem, because both sides walked away learning completely different lessons from this.
Unpack that for us. What did they learn?
Well, the city officials walked away thinking if you build it, they will come. Like, this is a viable tool for urban development and civic pride.
Right.
But the franchise owners, they looked at Milwaukee and experienced a collective revelation. They realized, wait a minute, we are the ultimate civic status symbol. We are the prize. And cities will quite literally mortgage their futures to acquire us.
Which leads us directly into what might be the most defining trauma in the history of American sports relocations. The 1957 departure of the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants to California.
Oh, yeah, this is a huge one.
It is massive. Now, I really want to challenge the conventional historical folklore here, because the story we are always told is that Walter O'Malley, the owner of the Dodgers, was desperate to keep his team in Brooklyn.
That is the legend.
Right. He had this grand vision for a brand new stadium at the intersection of Flatbush and Atlantic Avenues, right at the nexus of the Long Island Railroad.
A beautiful transit hub.
Exactly. And the narrative places the blame squarely on Robert Moses, the legendary master builder of New York, who notoriously refused to condemn the land in Brooklyn and offered O'Malley a site in Flushing Meadows, Queens, instead.
Yes.
So the folklore suggests O'Malley was just a tragic victim of Moses' stubbornness.
But the text urges us to look much deeper into the mechanics of that negotiation, because that is absolutely the sanitized public relations version of history.
So what really happened?
Well, yes. Robert Moses was fiercely intractable. He did not want to create a massive traffic nightmare in downtown Brooklyn. But historians and urban planners point out that Walter O'Malley was a brilliant calculating lawyer. He knew exactly what Moses's red lines were.
Ah, so he knew what would get a no.
Exactly. The alternative reading of this history is that O'Malley deliberately designed his demands in Brooklyn to be politically and logistically impossible.
Yeah.
He engineered the entire negotiation to fail.
Because he already had a better hand to play on the West Coast.
Precisely. While O'Malley was publicly shedding tears over leaving Brooklyn, he was quietly engaging with Los Angeles officials who were offering him a deal of unimaginable generosity at Chavez Ravine.
I mean, what were they offering him?
Los Angeles was offering to use public resources to clear the land, to grade the earth, to build all the access roads, and then just hand over a massive tract of prime real estate on terms that heavily favored the Dodgers.
So the entire standoff with Robert Moses was just elaborate political theater.
Yep. It gave O'Malley the perfect alibi. He gets to throw his hands up in front of the Brooklyn press corps and say, hey, I did everything I could, but the city forced my hand.
Wow. And in doing so, O'Malley established the permanent modern template for stadium extortion. You utilize the threat of departure or the tangible allure of a sweetheart deal from a rival municipality to extract massive public concessions.
Exactly. The move of the Dodgers and Giants to California proved definitively that local governments would enthusiastically weaponize their own public resources to purchase major league prestige.
And once that psychological barrier is broken, you get the absolute explosion of public stadium construction in the 1960s and 70s. This is the era of those massive symmetrical concrete bowls.
Oh, the cookie-cutter era.
Right. Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati, Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia, Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh. They all looked identical, and they were all financed by the public purse under this vague, unquantifiable justification of civic pride and modernization.
But let us break down the actual financial architecture of those cookie-cutter deals, because as the text points out, it is deeply flawed.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
None. The taxpayers owned the physical concrete bowl, but the franchise owners captured the entirety of the value generated inside of it.
So the teams kept the ticket revenue?
Yep. They captured the parking fees, they hoarded the broadcast revenues, which were just beginning to explode exponentially at that time.
All the while, the teams negotiated leases where they paid rent far below market rates.
Whoa, way below.
And they secured exemptions from local property taxes.
And they somehow managed to push the massive costs of structural maintenance and upgrades back onto the municipal ledger.
Right. The public assumed all the liabilities of property ownership, while the private entity vacuumed up all the assets.
But that raises an essential question for me. How does an owner actually force a seasoned mayor or a city council to sign a contract that is so visibly fundamentally lopsided?
It is a great question.
Right, because if I own a standard local business, say a massive furniture outlet, and I march into the mayor's office demanding they build me a brand new showroom using taxpayer dollars, they would laugh me out of the building.
Oh, they would have security escort you out? Exactly. If I threatened to leave, they would just say, go ahead. Another furniture company will buy your old lot tomorrow.
And that is because a furniture store operates in a free competitive market. Professional sports leagues do not.
Here's the core of it.
Yes. The entire architecture of leverage we are discussing relies on a legally protected cartel structure. The fundamental operating principle of American professional sports is artificial scarcity.
Artificial scarcity. So the major leagues deliberately restrict the supply of franchises far below what a natural competitive market would actually demand.
Exactly. And I want to dig into how this is legally possible, because the text references an antitrust exemption from 1922.
Right. The Supreme Court case of Federal Baseball Club versus National League.
Yes. So back in 1922, the Supreme Court ruled that professional baseball did not constitute interstate commerce, and therefore it was exempt from the Sherman Antitrust Act.
Which is wild.
It was a bizarre ruling, even for its time, essentially arguing that baseball was just a series of local exhibitions that merely happened to cross state lines. But that ruling gave Major League Baseball a legally bulletproof monopoly.
But what about the NFL or the NBA? They do not have that exact same sweeping exemption, right?
They do not have the 1922 exemption, no. But through a combination of congressional acts, like the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961, and highly protective union agreements, the NBA and the NHL have effectively achieved the exact same cartel status.
To put this in perspective for you listening, I want you to imagine a hostage negotiation. But the person holding the hostage is also the entity that owns the only police station, the only SWAT team, and all the communication lines in a 500-mile radius.
That is a terrifying analogy, but it's completely accurate.
Because in a free market, if the Raiders pack up and leave Oakland, a group of local billionaires would just band together, start a new professional football team, call them the Oakland Invaders, and immediately start selling tickets to fill that market vacuum.
Nature abhors a vacuum.
Right. But under the cartel structure, Oakland had exactly one franchise. When it leaves, the league strictly prohibits any new team from forming to fill that gap.
So if a city wants to replace the team they lost, they have to convince the cartel to grant them an expansion franchise, which usually requires an extortionate entry fee. Or they have to poach an existing team from another city by offering an even bigger public subsidy.
Bidding against each other.
Exactly. The competition is never between rival leagues trying to provide the best product for the consumer. The competition is entirely between individual municipalities bidding fiercely against one another for a deliberately suppressed scarce resource.
This manufactured scarcity is just a devastating weapon, and we really need to look at how it has been deployed in practice because the source material outlines several historical case studies of this extraction.
And we should spend some real time on them.
We should. Let us start with the Baltimore Colts in 1984, because this is not just about spreadsheets. This is about deep, deep civic trauma.
Oh, the Colts. Moving is legendary for all the wrong reasons. Robert Ursay, the owner of the Colts, had spent years engaging in this very public war of attrition with the city of Baltimore.
Over Memorial Stadium, right?
Yeah, he was demanding massive public subsidies to either renovate or replace Memorial Stadium. And the rhetoric had become incredibly toxic.
So toxic that the Maryland state legislature actually stepped in.
They did. They were so fed up with the extortion that they actually began drafting legislation to seize the Colts franchise using the power of eminent domain.
Which is a radical municipal move. They were going to forcefully buy the team for the public good.
So how does Ursay respond to the threat of eminent domain?
With a midnight escape.
In one of the most surreal and infamous moments in sports history, Ursay contacts the Mayflower Moving Company.
Under the cover of darkness.
Yes. While a literal snowstorm is hitting the region, a fleet of moving trucks pulls up to the team's training facility, and they just pack up everything.
Everything. The uniforms, the medical equipment, the weights, the office files.
By the time the sun came up the next morning, the trucks had crossed the state line. They were fleeing to Indianapolis.
And why Indianapolis? I mean, why there specifically?
Because the political leadership of Indianapolis had taken a massive municipal gamble. They had speculatively built the Hoosier Dome, using millions in public funds without actually having an NFL team to play in it.
Like Milwaukee in the 50s.
Exactly. They built an empty stadium specifically to act as a siren song to poach a disgruntled owner from somewhere else.
So the emotional devastation for Baltimore was absolute. Generations of fans woke up to find their cultural touchstone had just vanished overnight.
But beyond the local heartbreak, think about the message this telegraphed to every other franchise owner and every other mayor in the country.
It proved that the threats were not rhetorical.
Exactly. The owners were absolutely ruthless. They had zero loyalty to civic history. And if a city tried to call their bluff, the penalty was total, irreversible loss.
That signal resonated for decades. And it brings us to a deeply, deeply ironic sequel, the Cleveland Browns in 1995.
Art Model.
Yes. Art Model, the owner of the Browns, decides to abandon Cleveland. And where does he go? He moves the franchise to Baltimore.
The exact same city that had its heart ripped out a decade earlier.
Right. But the text is very clear that Model's departure was not just a dispute over the quality of Cleveland Stadium. This was a bailout.
It was a massive bailout of his personal financial mismanagement, because Cleveland had actually generated a civic funding package to renovate their facilities. They tried.
But Model was in trouble.
He was drowning in debt. He had made a series of disastrous private business decisions. So Baltimore, still desperate to heal the wound of losing the Colts, offered a package that was essentially a financial rescue operation.
What did they offer him?
They offered a brand new publicly financed stadium, an unbelievably lucrative lease agreement where Model kept virtually all the revenue and tens of millions of dollars in relocation fees that allowed him to instantly wipe out his private debts.
So the taxpayers of Maryland were essentially forced to subsidize a billionaire's bad accounting, while the city of Cleveland was left with an empty stadium and a shattered identity.
It is brutal. And we look at the NBA, the dynamic is exactly the same, but honestly, sometimes even more brazen.
Oh, you mean Seattle?
Yes, the departure of the Seattle Supersonics in 2008. It is infuriating because the bad faith was not just suspected, it was documented in black and white.
Let us unpack that, because this involves legal discovery, right?
Yes. So in 2006, a group of out-of-town investors led by Clay Bennett purchased the Sonics. And for 2 years, this ownership group engaged in a highly publicized performative pantomime of negotiating with the city of Seattle and the Washington state legislature.
They claimed they were doing everything in their power to keep the team in the Pacific Northwest, but just could not make the math work on a new arena.
Right, that was the public stance. But when the internal emails of the ownership group were later subpoenaed, the truth was just unmistakable.
What did the emails say?
The emails revealed that they had purchased the franchise with the explicit predetermined intention of moving it to Oklahoma City from day one.
Wow.
They never had any intention of staying in Seattle. They deliberately structured their arena demands to be politically toxic, engineering the failure of the negotiations to create a legal pretext for relocation.
So they were negotiating against the city in entirely bad faith, using the public trust as a disposable tool to secure a better real estate play in a different time zone.
It is nakedly extractive.
But perhaps the most sophisticated tactic of all in this source material was not moving a team, but strategically keeping a market completely empty. Let us talk about the phantom threat of Los Angeles.
Oh, this is truly a masterclass in cartel management.
I mean, it is evil genius.
It is. In 1995, both the Rams and the Raiders abandoned Los Angeles. And for the next 2 decades, the NFL deliberately kept the second largest media and economic market in the United States completely vacant.
They did not expand there, and they did not allow anyone to relocate there easily. Which honestly seems counterintuitive on the surface. Why would a profit-driven league ignore the massive television and ticket revenue of Southern California?
Because an empty Los Angeles was far more valuable as a weapon than as an occupied market.
Explain that. How does an empty market act as a weapon?
The NFL essentially kept Los Angeles as a standing generalized threat, a sword of Damocles dangling over the head of every single municipality that had an aging stadium.
So if you were a mayor...
Right. If you were the mayor of San Diego or Oakland or St. Louis or Minnesota, the league did not even have to negotiate aggressively. They just casually pointed at the empty real estate in L.A. and whispered, you know, if you do not build us a billion-dollar palace, we have a massive lucrative market waiting for us right over there.
So the empty market was successfully weaponized to extort billions in subsidies from existing smaller markets all across the country.
Exactly. But here is the friction point that the analysis really digs into. A mayor cannot simply stand at a press conference and tell their constituents, I am handing $500 million of your tax money to a private billionaire because I am terrified he will take his team to Los Angeles.
Right. The political optics of naked extortion are completely untenable. Politicians need political cover.
They desperately need a seemingly rational, objective justification to write these massive checks.
And that brings us to the great fiction of the stadium grift, the economic impact study.
This is the voodoo math that allows the entire system to function.
How does it work?
Well, whenever a franchise demands a new facility, they hire a specialized consulting firm to produce a voluminous, highly technical economic impact study.
Right.
And these documents are then paraded before city councils and state legislatures as objective empirical proof that the stadium is not a subsidy, but a vital economic engine.
So they promise the moon.
Oh yeah, the studies universally promise that the stadium will generate thousands of jobs. It will revitalize blighted neighborhoods, and it will ultimately pump so much new tax revenue into the system that the building will effectively pay for itself.
It sounds wonderful until you actually examine the structural bias inherent in how these studies are produced. Because the consulting firms writing these reports are selected and compensated directly by the team owners or the booster committees lobbying for the stadium.
Exactly, they're on the payroll.
Right. So if a consulting firm were to produce a rigorous, honest study that concluded actually dropping a football stadium in this neighborhood is a terrible use of municipal capital and will generate a negative return on investment, what happens to them?
That firm would be blacklisted immediately. They would never be hired by a sports franchise ever again. Their entire business model is predicated on their ability to generate scientifically polished, hyperinflated optimism.
And the primary mathematical sleight of hand these consultants use to inflate those numbers is the willful ignorance of what economists call the substitution effect.
This is key. It is the core fallacy embedded in every single stadium pitch, and we need to explain it clearly for you listening.
I really want to break this down because it is vital to understanding the grift. Let us imagine a typical middle-class family living in the suburbs of a major metropolitan area.
Like a normal family.
Right. They have a fixed amount of disposable income dedicated to entertainment each year. Let us just call it $2,000.
Makes sense.
Now, they do not have a printing press in their basement, right? They are not magically creating new wealth just because the city built a new arena downtown.
Exactly. Their budget is fixed. So if that family decides to spend $400 on tickets, parking foam fingers and overpriced beers at the new stadium on a Sunday afternoon, that $400 does not represent new economic growth for the region.
Because it is substituted spending.
Exactly. They are taking the money they would have normally spent going to the local bowling alley or buying tickets to the local independent movie theater, or dining at a locally owned restaurant in their neighborhood, and they're handing it over to the sports franchise instead.
So the money is just being reshuffled geographically within the same county. It is a zero-sum game.
The stadium is basically just cannibalizing the entertainment revenue of the surrounding local businesses.
But the economic impact studies commissioned by the teams treat every single dollar spent at the stadium concession stand as if it just materialized out of thin air, representing entirely new economic vitality.
And honestly, the economic reality is actually far worse than a simple zero-sum reshuffling because of what economists refer to as the leakage problem.
Oh, the leakage problem is fascinating. Let us talk about that.
When that family spends their money at the local independent restaurant, the restaurant owner pays the local waitstaff right. They buy produce from local farmers, and they hire a local accountant.
So the money circulates and multiplies within the community.
Exactly. But when that exact same money is spent inside a stadium, where does the vast majority of that revenue ultimately go?
It is absorbed by the single largest operating cost of any professional sports franchise, the players' salaries.
Right. And these players are highly compensated millionaires who quite frequently have very little economic connection to the host city itself.
The text underscores how incredibly leaky this economic model is. Let us say you have an NBA star earning $30 million a year playing for a franchise in the Midwest.
Okay.
During the season, they might lease a luxury penthouse in the city. But the moment the season ends, they return to their permanent residences in Los Angeles or Miami or Monaco.
Right. They bank with multinational financial institutions based in New York. They buy luxury vehicles manufactured in Europe.
So their wealth immediately evaporates from the local municipal economy. The economic multiplier effect of a sports stadium is shockingly low when you compare it to a public infrastructure project, like building a new regional hospital or a public high school.
Oh, yeah, because with the hospital, the doctors, the nurses, and the teachers all live shop and pay property taxes in the exact same community for decades.
I want to highlight a devastating statistic from the source material regarding Camden Yards in Baltimore because this just blows the whole impact study myth out of the water.
Camden Yards is the perfect example of this.
When the boosters were pitching the public on financing Camden Yards in the early 1990s, which was touted as the ultimate miracle of urban redevelopment, right?
The gold standard.
The official economic projections promised the creation of roughly 1,300 permanent jobs. It was sold as a massive employment engine.
But when independent academic economists went back years later to rigorously audit those claims, looking at actual employment data rather than projections, what do they discover?
What did they find?
They found that the actual permanent employment impact on the Baltimore area was statistically indistinguishable from zero.
Wait, zero?
Zero. There was no measurable bump in long-term employment that could be attributed to the presence of the stadium.
That is insane.
The consultants had not just miscalculated by a few percentage points. Their projections were entirely fabricated off by an entire order of magnitude.
Now I can hear a listener who follows municipal politics raising an objection right now. They might be thinking, hold on, Alex Sam. When my city built its new stadium, it was not paid for by an increase in my local property taxes.
Right, they issued a tourist tax.
Exactly. The mayor explicitly funded it through a tourist tax like a surcharge on hotel rooms or rental cars at the airport. So does not that mean we successfully exported the cost of the stadium to wealthy business travelers and tourists, thereby protecting the local taxpayer?
That is perhaps the most politically brilliant, deeply deceptive framing mechanism in the entire stadium playbook.
It sounds so appealing.
It does. The tourist tax argument allows a politician to smile and say, do not worry, it is free money. Someone else is footing the bill. But this analysis demands that we deconstruct the reality of this.
Okay, let us break it down.
First of all, local residents absolutely rent cars when their vehicles break down. And they book hotel rooms for visiting family or local conventions, so they are not somehow immune to the tax.
Right, it still hits locals.
But the more profound point is about the fundamental nature of public resources.
Because the capacity of a municipality to levy a tax on a hotel room is a finite public resource.
Exactly. If a city has the political capital to pass a 3% tax increase on hotel rooms, that revenue stream could be directed anywhere.
Literally anywhere.
If you legally bind that revenue stream to pay off a 30-year municipal bond for a billionaire's stadium, You're actively choosing not to use that exact same money to increase teacher salaries, repave failing infrastructure, or properly fund the local fire department.
The money does not stop being public wealth just because you extracted it from a tourist. You are still capturing a vital public resource and diverting it to subsidize a private asset.
Which brings us to an even more opaque, insidious funding mechanism that cities use to hide the true cost of these deals. Tax increment financing, or TIFs.
Oh, TIFs. To the average voter, TIF sounds like incredibly dry, bureaucratic accounting jargon.
It is designed to sound boring.
Right. But the source material explains that it is actually a highly sophisticated mechanism for siphoning money away from the core functions of government. I want to construct a theoretical model of how this works so you listening can really grasp it.
Let us do it.
Let us say a city designates the 20 square blocks around a proposed stadium as a TIF district. What exactly happens to the tax revenue in that district?
Okay, so when the city creates the TIF district, they establish a baseline. They look at the current property tax revenue generated by those 20 blocks and they freeze it.
Freeze it. Okay.
Say, okay, this area currently generates $10 million a year in property taxes for the city's general fund. We will guarantee the general fund continues to get that $10 million.
But the city argues that because they're building a shiny new stadium, the property values in those 20 blocks are going to skyrocket over the next few decades.
And here is where the trap snaps shut. Any new property tax revenue generated above that frozen baseline, the increment does not go into the city's general fund.
Wait, so where does it go?
If 10 years later, those 20 blocks are generating $15 million in property taxes, that additional $5 million does not go to the school district to buy new textbooks. It does not go to the parks department.
So it is walled off.
Yes. That $5 million increment is legally fenced off and diverted exclusively to pay down the massive debt the city took on to build the stadium.
But the underlying deception here is inflation and natural market growth. Even if you did not build the stadium, property values naturally rise over a 30-year period. Real estate naturally appreciates.
Precisely. The boosters will point to the rising property values and claim the TIF is self-financing because the stadium miraculously created all this new wealth.
But that is a lie.
It is. In reality, the TIF structure routinely captures the normal baseline appreciation of urban real estate, starving the schools, and the municipal government of the revenue they naturally require just to keep up with inflation.
It is a shell game.
A total shell game designed to obscure the fact that broad public infrastructure is being cannibalized to pay for a private sports facility.
Which brings up a fascinating contradiction in the text. We have just spent 20 minutes dissecting how stadiums do not fundamentally alter the macroeconomic reality of a city. They just reshuffle local money.
Right.
So if that is true, why are the franchise owners so existentially obsessed with getting new ones? I mean, why does an owner threaten to rip a team out of a community, alienating millions of fans over a stadium that is structurally perfectly fine, maybe just 20 years old?
To understand the owner's relentless desperation for new concrete, we have to look at the revolution in sports broadcasting that occurred in the 1980s and 90s.
Okay, the TV money.
Prior to the explosion of cable television gate receipts, the actual selling of tickets to humans walking through the turnstiles were the absolute lifeblood of a sports franchise.
So the business model was volume. You wanted a massive stadium, 80,000 seats, priced accessibly for the working and middle class, and you wanted to pack the house every single Sunday.
But then the television contracts went thermonuclear.
They just exploded.
Today, leagues like the NFL operate on a model of massive equalized national revenue sharing. The league negotiates a multi-billion-dollar broadcast deal with the major networks and streaming platforms, and they take that giant pile of money and slice it equally among all 32 franchises.
So let me get this straight. If you are the owner of the Kansas City Chiefs and you are winning Super Bowls and rating through the roof, your share of the national television pie is exactly the same as the owner of the Carolina Panthers, who might be having a terrible season.
Exactly. The national broadcast revenue is socialized.
Wow.
Therefore, if you are a hyper-competitive billionaire owner, you cannot gain a financial advantage over your rivals through television money. The only variable you can control, the only way you can out-earn the other owners and increase the valuation of your specific franchise is through what the league classifies as local revenue.
And critically, local revenue does not have to be shared with the rest of the cartel. You kill what you eat.
So the calculation changes entirely. How do you maximize local unshared revenue? You do not do it by adding 10,000 more bleacher seats for blue-collar fans.
You do it by completely redesigning the architecture of the stadium to maximize the revenue extracted per square foot.
Yes, this birthed the luxury suite revolution.
And this is where the real money is.
A modern American sports stadium is no longer designed as a public gathering space. It is essentially a highly engineered vehicle for housing climate-controlled luxury boxes that can be leased to multinational corporations for $500,000 a season.
I want to walk through the stark mathematics of this grift based on the models in the text because it is staggering.
Let us do the math.
Let us say a billionaire owner successfully extorts a city into providing a $400 million public subsidy to aid in the construction of a new $1 billion stadium.
The standard deal these days.
Right. The public issues municipal bonds, takes on massive debt, and hands over the $400 million. In exchange, the politicians get to say, the city owns the building.
Owns it in quotes.
Right. But the franchise controls all the revenue streams. So the new stadium opens, and it features 100 state-of-the-art luxury suites.
And the owner leases those suites to banks, tech companies, and law firms for an average of $500,000 a year. That generates $50 million in pure, unshared local revenue annually.
$50 million a year going straight into the owner's private accounts. Not a dime is shared with the league, and more importantly, not a dime goes back to the municipal government that fronted the $400 million.
So let us extrapolate that over the 30-year lifespan of the stadium lease, which is typically the exact amount of time the taxpayers are burdened with paying off the bond debt.
Okay, over 30 years.
Over 30 years, that franchise owner pockets $1.5 billion from the luxury suites alone.
That is nearly 4 times the total value of the public's initial investment.
Exactly. And that $1.5 billion does not even account for the corporate naming rights plastered on the side of the building, the premium club seating the parking monopolies, or the fact that the sheer existence of the new stadium skyrockets the overall equity valuation of the franchise itself.
Meanwhile, what does the public entity get for its $400 million investment?
Nothing good.
They get 0 interest on their capital. They get 0 equity in the appreciating asset of the franchise. They receive a lease payment that is frequently a fraction of market value.
And it gets worse.
How does it get worse?
To add ultimate insult to injury, the lease agreements usually dictate that when the stadium inevitably needs a multi-million-dollar technological upgrade or a new roof 15 years down the line, the public, as the technical owner of the building, is legally obligated to foot the bill for the capital improvements.
That is just insane. It is a financial arrangement so wildly asymmetrical that no rational actor in a private free market negotiation would ever accept it. It is pure extraction.
And it is not just the municipal taxpayers getting squeezed from the bottom up. The die-hard loyal fans are being aggressively strip-mined as well.
Oh, the PSLs. I want to talk about personal seat licenses because this is one of the most brazen inventions in modern sports finance.
It really is.
If you are a fan who wants to buy season tickets in one of these taxpayer-subsidized palaces, you can no longer just call the ticket office and purchase the tickets.
No, the right to simply purchase the ticket has been commodified. You have to buy a PSL first.
Explain what that means.
This is a mandatory one-time fee imposed by the team, ranging anywhere from a few $1,000s for a mediocre upper deck seat to well over $150,000 for premium sightlines near the 50-yard line.
And you pay this fee just to unlock the right to then pay face value for the actual season tickets every year. I was trying to map this onto how a normal business operates, and it is absurd. It is exactly like a high-end nightclub telling you that before you are even allowed to approach the bar to purchase a $20 cocktail, you must first pay a $10,000 permanent cover charge.
This is a great analogy.
And that cover charge provides you with absolutely nothing. No drinks, no food, no service. It merely grants you the privilege of being allowed to enter into a commercial transaction.
And the source material highlights the twisted economic brilliance of the PSL from the owner's perspective.
How so?
When a devoted fan drains their savings to pay a $50,000 PSL, they are effectively providing the billionaire owner with an unsecured zero-interest loan.
Wow.
The fan receives no financial return on that capital. They receive no equity stake in the franchise. And if the team ultimately decides to break its lease and relocate in 20 years anyway, the value of that PSL evaporates into thin air. The money's just gone.
So the owner takes that massive tool of fan capital, bundles it with the public taxpayer subsidy, and uses both to fund their portion of the stadium construction.
The public taxpayers and the emotionally invested fans absorb 100% of the financial risk, and provide the capital liquidity while the private owner reaps the entirety of the appreciating asset.
So I keep coming back to this. If the economics are this universally objectively terrible, if the math is this blatantly lopsided, we have to ask the psychological question. Why do mayors, city councils, and governors keep capitulating? Are they just mathematically illiterate? Are they being duped?
The source text argues it goes much, much deeper than individual ignorance or backdoor corruption. It is rooted in the structural political psychology of what urban sociologists refer to as the growth machine.
The growth machine, what is that?
This is an alignment of powerful local interests that universally benefit from massive public works projects. And the first psychological pillar supporting this machine is the asymmetry of salience.
I found this concept fascinating when reading the chapter. Break down the asymmetry of salience for us.
It is fundamentally about the political calculus of what is visible to the voter versus what is invisible. The benefits of a massive stadium deal are highly concentrated, immediate, and incredibly visible. A mayor gets to put on a customized hard hat, hold a golden shovel, and cut a giant ribbon in front of a phalanx of flashing local news cameras.
They get to stand at the 50-yard line on opening day, waving to 80,000 cheering people, hailed as the visionary leader who saved the team and preserved the city's honor.
Exactly. That level of visceral emotional imagery secures re-election campaigns.
But the costs of the deal?
The costs are entirely diffuse, abstract, and invisible. The true cost is a highly complex 30-year municipal bond obligation that will be quietly serviced by taxpayers who might currently be in elementary school.
It is a fractional, imperceptible increase in a regional sales tax.
Right. The politician reaps the immediate intoxicating reward of the ribbon cutting, but escapes all long-term accountability for the fiscal drain. Because by the time the municipal budget actually starts fracturing under the weight of the debt 15 years later, that politician is long out of office, likely working as a highly paid consultant.
On the flip side, the political penalty for inaction is immediate and politically fatal. If a mayor attempts to be a responsible steward of the public posts, stands up to the cartel, and actually lets a team leave their political career, is effectively terminated that afternoon.
The text mentions the fallout of Art Model leaving Cleveland. The local politicians who were in charge, regardless of their actual culpability, were politically radioactive for years.
And in San Diego, after the Chargers departed for Los Angeles, the entire local political ecosystem realigned around assigning blame for the loss.
It is a deeply toxic incentive structure. And this political calculation is reinforced by a powerful ecosystem of complicity, starting squarely with the local sports media.
This is a vital point to unpack. In theory, journalism exists to hold the powerful accountable and scrutinize massive expenditures of public wealth.
But local sports media operates under a completely different paradigm, because their very existence depends on access to the franchise.
Right. If you manage a local sports talk radio station, your ratings and therefore your entire advertising revenue model depend entirely on the daily manufactured drama of the local team.
If the franchise leaves town, your audience evaporates overnight. If you are a beat reporter for the local newspaper, your career trajectory relies on maintaining access to the locker room, the coaches, and the front office.
So systematically, the local media apparatus morphs into a de facto public relations wing for the Stadium Booster Committee.
They uncritically amplify the owner's narrative that the 20-year-old stadium is somehow obsolete and that the city must take immediate drastic action to maintain its status.
And when critical voices do emerge, say an academic economist or a local fiscal watchdog pointing out the terrible math, the sports media frames them as being anti-progress, anti-sports, or even anti-city.
And joining the media in this powerful coalition of the willing are the local construction unions and real estate developers.
Why are they pushing for it?
From their perspective, the lobbying makes total rational sense. $1 billion public infrastructure project guarantees years of steady, high-paying union labor for electricians, pipe fitters, and iron workers.
It guarantees massive procurement contracts for local concrete and steel suppliers.
So they deploy their considerable political capital to lobby aggressively for the deal. A mayor sitting in their office is entirely surrounded. The media, the unions, the wealthy elite, the Chamber of Commerce, they are all in unison demanding capitulation.
And wrapping all of this together is a profound, almost primal psychology of civic identity.
This is the emotional core of it.
For many American cities, particularly those in the Rust Belt that have endured decades of deindustrialization, factory closures, and population loss, The professional sports franchise serves as the final shimmering totem of civic relevance.
There is a deep existential dread associated with the cartel. Losing a team does not just feel like losing a local entertainment option. It feels like a public declaration that the city itself is dying, that it is being officially demoted to minor league status in the American hierarchy.
The owners are keenly aware of this psychological vulnerability, and they exploit it ruthlessly at the negotiating table.
But the text reveals the most telling detail about this entire dynamic. When the decision is actually removed from the pressurized, lobbied environment of the mayor's office and given directly to the citizens, the entire illusion shatters.
This is my favorite part of the analysis.
We have to look at the consistent failure of direct democracy for stadium boosters. When voters are actually presented with a ballot measure, allowing them to directly approve or reject these public subsidies, as we saw in San Diego in 2016, or in multiple early referendums in places like Milwaukee and Seattle, what is the outcome?
They consistently vote NO.
Overwhelmingly. When voters are stripped of the media spin and simply ask the direct question, do you authorize the expenditure of $1 billion of public money to construct this stadium, they demonstrate profound skepticism.
Given the choice, the aggregate public prefers funding infrastructure, transit schools, and emergency services.
This stark divergence proves that the politicians approving these deals in closed-door sessions are not faithfully executing the will of their constituents. They are capitulating to the organized asymmetrical pressure of the growth machine.
We have spent a considerable amount of time dissecting how the money is extracted. But the text forces us to look closely at who the money is being extracted from and who it is being transferred to.
Because this is not just a matter of inefficient municipal accounting. It is a profound mechanism of distributional injustice.
It functions as a highly regressive Robin Hood scheme operating in reverse. We are looking at a massive systemic transfer of wealth originating from working class and middle class taxpayers flowing directly upward to the absolute wealthiest individuals on the planet.
To put the sheer scale of this inequity into perspective, the source material notes that Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, possesses a net worth of roughly $14 billion.
$14 billion.
Steve Ballmer, the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, commands a net worth hovering around $120 billion.
It is unfathomable wealth.
These are individuals who possess the liquid capital to comfortably finance their own commercial real estate empires without noticing the expense. Yet the public cost of constructing the arenas that house their assets falls broadly across the entire local tax base.
And frequently, these subsidies are financed through highly regressive mechanisms like regional sales taxes, which disproportionately drain the income of lower-earning residents. We are taxing the mechanic and the school teacher, people who, frankly, have been priced out of ever affording a ticket to step foot inside the luxury building their taxes are paying for.
And the injustice extends far beyond taxation. It manifests in the physical geography of the city itself. The history of American stadium development is inextricably tragically intertwined with the destruction and displacement of vulnerable communities.
We briefly touched on the Dodgers relocating to Los Angeles earlier, but we need to stop and tell the full, devastating human story of Chavez Ravine.
This is truly one of the darkest, most shameful chapters in the history of American urban planning. Before Dodger Stadium existed, Chavez Ravine was a vibrant, deeply rooted, low-income Mexican-American community.
It was a thriving neighborhood where generations of families had built their lives.
But in the early 1950s, the local government utilized the devastating power of eminent domain to forcibly condemn the land and evict the residents.
The official justification presented to the public was that the land was desperately needed to construct a massive public housing project. The city literally deployed law enforcement to physically remove families who resisted the eviction from their homes.
But the promised public housing project was never constructed. The political winds shifted, the funding was killed, and the land just sat there vacant and scarred.
And then a few years later, the city government turned around and handed that exact parcel of cleared, violently appropriated land to Walter O'Malley and the Dodgers for a fraction of its value, specifically so they could construct Dodger Stadium.
They destroyed an entire community of color under the moral guise of public utility, only to hand the spoils of that destruction to a private sports monopoly.
It is a tragic, crystal-clear illustration of whose interests the municipal apparatus was truly designed to serve. Now, if we look at stadium development today, the displacement operates through a slightly different mechanism.
It is less about bulldozers and direct government condemnation and more about aggressive, speculative gentrification.
Right. The moment a new stadium district is announced in an urban core real estate, speculators immediately swoop into the surrounding working-class neighborhoods. Property taxes and commercial rents skyrocket exponentially.
The longtime residents, the legacy dive bars, the local bodegas, they are all economically priced out of their own neighborhoods long before the first pitch is even thrown in the new stadium.
And inside the stadium itself, the displacement continues through architectural design. The social geography of the modern stadium physically removes the working class.
How do they do that?
The massive upper decks, the cheap bleacher seats where multi-generational blue-collar families used to congregate and build community have been systematically shrunk or removed entirely from the blueprints.
To make room for exclusive VIP lounges, craft cocktail bars, and premium club seating.
Exactly. The modern American stadium is no longer a public gathering place reflecting the diversity of the city. It is a fortified citadel of premium experiences explicitly designed to extract maximum revenue from the affluent corporate class, subsidized by the taxes of the very people who have been structurally excluded from participating in the experience.
Now, in the spirit of intellectual rigor and honesty, we cannot simply present a one-sided prosecution. The source text insists that we steelman the boosters.
We have to look at the absolute best, most economically sound arguments the pro-stadium advocates can muster and examine them fairly. So I'm going to push back on you here, Sam. I want to advocate for the other side for a minute.
Bring it on.
What about a place like Coors Field in Denver? If you walk around the lower downtown district today, it is booming. It is packed with breweries, lofts, and restaurants. It is an incredible urban environment.
Okay, that's true.
And beyond the economics, is not a stadium at the end of the day a public good? A city subsidizes the symphony orchestra, the art museum, and the massive public park, and no one demands that the symphony run a profit.
Wow.
Why do we hold a baseball stadium to a stricter standard of dollar-for-dollar financial return when it clearly provides cultural value?
It is crucial we engage with those specific arguments because they are the most potent defenses the boosters have, and they are not entirely baseless. Let us address the localized development argument first.
The Lodo effect.
Right. While the broad macroeconomic consensus proves that stadiums do not boost the economy of a metropolitan region as a whole, more granular micro-level research by economists like Xia Feng and Brad Humphreys demonstrates that there is a measurable localized bump in commercial and residential property values within a very tight radius.
Say a few miles of a new facility.
Yes, it creates a localized neighborhood amenity effect.
Mm-hmm.
So the Lodo effect in Denver is mathematically real.
Okay, so the boosters have a point there.
They do, but it is heavily conditional and often misrepresented. The text points out that Coors Field was strategically dropped into a neighborhood that was already undergoing a historic, organically driven revitalization.
Lodo had recently been designated a historic district, right?
Yes, and private developers were already actively converting abandoned warehouses into residential lofts before the stadium was finalized. The stadium certainly accelerated and anchored that localized growth, providing a focal point, but it did not conjure the economic revival out of thin air.
It is a highly localized real estate play, not a macro citywide economic engine.
Exactly.
Okay, but what about the public goods argument, the symphony orchestra analogy? You cannot put a spreadsheet value on a city coming together for a Super Bowl run? Does not that cultural unity have intrinsic value beyond just tax revenue?
That is a very fair philosophical analogy, and surprisingly, economists actually attempt to measure it. They utilize a concept called non-use civic value.
What does that mean?
This quantifies the pride, the joy, and the psychological benefit that residents derive just from knowing they reside in a major league city, even if they never personally purchase a ticket or attend a game.
It functions similarly to the psychological value of knowing a massive national park exists, even if you never hiked in it.
Exactly. Studies have attempted to quantify this civic value using complex contingent valuation surveys, and they confirm that the psychological benefit is absolutely real. But here is the fatal catch for the boosters.
What is the catch?
When economists quantify that civic pride, it is typically valued at roughly 13 to 16% of a stadium's total construction cost.
So the pride is real, the cultural unity is real, but it is worth maybe 15% of the price tag.
It explains a legitimate fraction of the value, but it absolutely does not mathematically justify a municipality picking up 100% of a $750 million check.
Right.
It does not bridge the massive cavernous mathematical gap between the public cost and the public benefit.
Now, what about marquee events? The boosters will frequently argue that while a regular Tuesday night baseball game in August might just recycle local entertainment dollars, hosting a global mega event like the Super Bowl or the Final Four brings in genuine massive infusions of out-of-town tourist capital.
Which is undeniably true. If a family flies in from Boston to watch the Super Bowl in Glendale, Arizona, they are renting cars, booking hotel rooms at surge pricing, and eating at local steakhouses.
They are injecting entirely new capital into the Arizona economy that would not have existed otherwise.
Yes, the injection of capital during a mega event is real, but a city might host a Super Bowl once every decade if they are incredibly lucky and favored by the cartel. Lumping the rare once-in-a-generation economic impact of a mega event into the same standard economic model as 8 regular-season football games is a deliberate, deceptive conflation used by consultants to artificially inflate the everyday value of the stadium.
That makes perfect sense. And then we have the labor argument. We rightly mocked the fabricated claim of 1,300 permanent jobs at Camden Yards earlier, but what about the actual construction workers who build the facility?
Right, building a multi-billion-dollar architectural marvel guarantees 3 years of high-paying union labor for electricians, plumbers, crane operators, and iron workers. You cannot stand in front of a local pipe fitter who just secured 2 years of steady wages to feed his family and tell him that his paycheck is an economic illusion.
It is absolutely real income for real workers.
It is, and it perfectly explains why the building trades lobby so fiercely for these deals. But from a macroeconomic perspective, it is a temporary, fleeting injection of capital. Once the golden scissors cut the ribbon on opening day, those construction jobs evaporate entirely.
Finally, the ultimate, most sophisticated defense the boosters deploy is what we might call the Amazon HQ2 argument.
The race to the bottom.
Right. They argue that in the modern American economy, local governments subsidize absolutely everything. Cities offer billions of dollars in tax abatements and infrastructure upgrades to lure tech headquarters, automobile manufacturing plants, or Hollywood film productions.
They argue that singling out sports franchises is hypocritical because the root problem is not sports. The root problem is American federalism, which forces municipalities into a brutal prisoner's dilemma, where they have to bid against each other for any form of mobile capital.
Okay, I have to concede that point. If a state refuses to subsidize a new microchip manufacturing plant, the corporation just moves the plant to the state next door. That will. It is a structural race to the bottom across all industries.
But as the text powerfully concludes, even when we generously grant every single one of these steel-manned points, the localized property bumps in Lido, the 15% valuation of civic pride, the occasional tourist influx of a Super Bowl, the temporary construction jobs, and the undeniable flaws of federalism, when you add all of those benefits together, they still do not come remotely close to mathematically justifying the writing of an $850 million public check to a billionaire for a luxury entertainment complex where the public receives zero equity.
Precisely. They are valid economic considerations, but they are not excuses for extortion. The fundamental mathematics of the upward wealth transfer remain entirely intact and indefensible.
So as an American consuming this information, it is incredibly easy to sink into a sense of fatalism, to look at this entrenched system and think, well, this is just the reality of professional sports. This is the unavoidable price of admission to have a team.
But the text does something brilliant here. It asks us to look across the ocean, and the moment we do, the illusion of inevitability completely shatters.
It really does. If you look at the European football model, they have built arguably the most passionate, lucrative, high-stakes sporting culture on the planet, but they have built it on an entirely different structural foundation.
And the primary reason they do not suffer from this specific brand of municipal extortion is because they do not operate a closed cartel.
They utilize a system called promotion and relegation.
I want to make sure the mechanics of this are crystal clear because it breaks the entire leverage model.
In American sports, when a billionaire buys a franchise, they are buying a permanent league granted monopoly in that city. But in European soccer, a club's place in the prestigious top division is never permanent. It has to be earned on the field every single year.
So if your team performs poorly and finishes at the bottom of the English Premier League, you are relegated, literally demoted to the lower, less lucrative division.
And concurrently, the best performing teams from the lower division are promoted upward to take your place in the top tier.
So a team simply cannot threaten a city. If the billionaire owner of a massive London club marches into the mayor's office, slams his fist on the desk and says, "You will build me a taxpayer-funded stadium or I am moving this franchise to a new market," The mayor can literally just laugh him out of the room.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because there is no artificial scarcity. If that arrogant owner actually packs up and leaves, the fans will revolt. Rival clubs in the area will immediately expand to fill the market vacuum, and ambitious lower division clubs in the city will simply play their way into the top tier to replace the team that left.
The leverage simply does not exist because the supply of teams is not artificially restricted.
Because the owners cannot successfully extort the local government for subsidies, European clubs are forced to rely on traditional private commercial finance.
The text highlights Arsenal's Emirates Stadium in London as the perfect counterexample to the American grift.
It is a stunning contrast. The Emirates Stadium opened in 2006. It is one of the largest, most state-of-the-art stadium developments in all of English football, and it was constructed with zero direct public subsidy.
So how did they finance a massive infrastructure project without raiding the public treasury?
They did it the hard way. The club made the painful decision to sell off star players to raise initial cash. They aggressively sold the corporate naming rights to the building before a single seat was even installed.
And they went to private financial institutions and secured massive bank loans using their future ticketing and broadcast revenues as collateral.
They operated exactly like a normal private commercial real estate developer because the political structure gave them no other choice.
And beyond the open competitive league structure, there's also a fundamentally different cultural and legal approach to the concept of ownership itself. The text points us toward Germany, which utilizes something called the 50+1 rule.
This is a fascinating mechanism for preserving civic control. In the German Bundesliga, the league bylaws strictly dictate that the club's members, meaning the actual dues-paying fans, must permanently retain a majority of the voting control over the club.
50% of the voting rights plus one additional vote.
So even at a massive, globally dominant club like Bayern Munich, outside corporate entities or sovereign wealth funds can invest capital and hold minority financial stakes, but the fans literally control the boardroom.
Which means a rogue profit-maximizing billionaire owner cannot unilaterally decide to uproot the team and move it to another city, or exponentially hike ticket prices to price out the working class, or attempt to demand a ruinous public subsidy.
Because the fan coalition sitting on the board would simply vote the proposal down.
Exactly. The 50+1 rule permanently structuralizes the fans' interests and completely removes the relocation threat. It is the ultimate leverage killer.
Now, we do have one tiny anomalous exception here in the United States that proves the rule, which is the Green Bay Packers. They're a community-owned nonprofit corporation.
But the NFL realized how dangerous that model was to their leverage, did they not?
They absolutely did. Recognizing that community ownership prevents the extortion of subsidies, the NFL explicitly altered its league bylaws to ensure that no other franchise can ever adopt the Green Bay model again. They grandfathered the Packers in, but outlawed the practice for everyone else to protect the cartel's leverage.
Now, to be entirely fair to the United States, the international sports scene is not a perfect, uncorrupted utopia. The text is careful to point out that when you examine massive global sporting events like the FIFA World Cup or the International Olympic Committee, they operate exactly like American cartels and frequently with even less oversight.
Yes, the IOC and FIFA function as unchecked global monopolies. They control access to the most prestigious events on Earth, and they demand that host nations, frequently developing nations like Brazil or Qatar, expend billions upon billions of public dollars to construct massive state-of-the-art stadiums on wildly compressed construction timelines.
And tragically, frequently, these multi-billion-dollar stadiums immediately become white elephants, massive abandoned concrete husks that sit rotting in the sun just months after the two-week tournament concludes, leaving the host nation saddled with generational debt.
But that international corruption just reinforces the central thesis of the text. Wherever you find a monopoly controlling a highly desired, scarce sporting resource, you will inevitably find massive public exploitation.
So if the core problem is structurally designed by the cartel, what are the actionable, realistic reform solutions here in America? How does a society actually stop this mechanism of extraction?
The most potent fundamental reform would have to occur at the federal level. Congress must bust the antitrust exemptions and legal protections that allow these leagues to operate as unchecked cartels.
If federal legislation eliminates their ability to artificially restrict the supply of franchises, if you force them to operate in a true free market, you instantly destroy the artificial scarcity and thereby destroy the relocation threat.
And secondarily, the text focuses on the tax code. We need to kill the federal tax exemptions for municipal stadium bonds.
Right now, when a city issues hundreds of millions of dollars in municipal debt to construct a billionaire's private stadium, the federal government actually subsidizes that debt by making the interest paid to the bondholders tax-exempt.
It is a hidden federal subsidy on top of the local subsidy. Congress needs to completely close that loophole, declaring that bonds used for private professional sports facilities do not qualify for federal tax exemption.
And at the local municipal level, the reforms are about transparency and democracy. City councils must start demanding truly independent fiscal analyses commissioned by neutral third parties and completely insulated from the teams and the booster committees.
And most importantly, they need to force these multi-million-dollar subsidy deals onto the public ballot. If mayors and governors are truly confident that these deals are magnificent engines of economic growth for the city, they should have no fear in letting the voters directly approve the bond measures.
But as we have seen historically, they avoid public referendums precisely because they know the public sees through the grift and will reject them.
Okay, let us pull all of this incredible analysis together. We have journeyed from the golden age of private ballparks, built by stealthy real estate maneuvers, to the betrayal of Brooklyn.
We have seen how the cartel utilizes artificial scarcity and phantom threats like Los Angeles to create leverage.
We have unpacked the voodoo math of the economic impact studies, the substitution effect, and the siphoning power of TIFs.
We have looked at the massive upward transfer of wealth driven by the luxury box revolution, the political psychology of the growth machine, the devastating displacement of communities like Chavez Ravine, and the stark contrast with how the European model operates.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over.
We are currently living in an era of staggering, rapid technological acceleration. High-definition streaming, augmented reality, and virtual reality broadcasting are actively making the at-home viewing experience objectively better, infinitely more immersive, and significantly cheaper than physically navigating traffic to sit in a stadium.
As the younger generations shift their consumption habits, if fans simply stop caring about the physical building, if the stadium ceases to be the center of the cultural experience and simply becomes a television studio, will the physical structure eventually lose its totemic emotional power over cities?
If the public no longer views the stadium as a sacred, indispensable civic space, does the owner's leverage finally permanently collapse?
It is a profound, forward-looking question about the future of civic space, the evolution of entertainment, and the ultimate limits of extortion.
It really is. And I want to take a moment to emphasize to our listeners that this entire conversation, every historical detail, every economic breakdown, and the deep analysis we have explored today is derived entirely from the second book in the monumental 30-volume series to preserve, protect, and defend the soul of America.
Yes. The specific book title providing our source material today is Volume 2, Fentanyl Nation, Inside America's Opioid Catastrophe, authored by Sue B. Howell.
Now, you might be pausing for a second and thinking, wait, the title is Fentanyl Nation. How does a comprehensive book about the American opioid catastrophe connect to a deep dive on municipal stadium grifts?
But the true brilliance of this expansive 30-volume series is how it meticulously traces the myriad hidden ways that American communities are being systematically hollowed out.
Throughout this deep dive, we have talked about the diversion of public funds, the exploitation of civic loyalty, and the upward transfer of wealth that leaves local governments starved of resources.
Whether it is the devastating public health crisis of opioids draining the life and vitality from a forgotten town, or the municipal financial drain orchestrated by sports cartels, quietly siphoning wealth from the public ledger, the overarching thematic bridge of this series is civic exploitation.
It is fundamentally about how public resources, community well-being, and vulnerable populations are repeatedly sacrificed for concentrated private gain.
It is about training ourselves to recognize the structural forces that prey on the foundation of our communities, regardless of the different forms those forces take.
Precisely. It is a masterful connection of themes. We enthusiastically encourage you to go check this out for yourself. The book is now available in all Amazon bookstores across the world.
Please read it, dive into the research, leave your comments, and share your feedback on Amazon. It is an absolutely vital piece of work for understanding the true political economy of our communities and the forces shaping them.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Take care and keep asking the hard questions.